I searched through over 100 City League event results to find the best performing rogue decks in the Japanese Twilight Masquerade format, which will be the same format we play at NAIC this year. If you're looking for coverage of the more competitive, more popular meta decks for this format, I do have a video covering those decks as well. I'll leave a link to that in the description and probably in a pinned comment if you want to check that out. But now let's get into these rogue decks from Japan. We're going to start out with a few Blissey EX decks. This first deck list comes from a second place City League finish, and it looks kind of like the one that you may have seen on stream from one of the Champions League streams. But let's first look at what Blissey EX does. Blissey EX has 300 HP, which is really high for a Stage 1 EX Pokemon, and it has one ability and one attack. The ability Happy Switch reads, you may use this ability once during your turn, move a basic energy attached to one of your Pokemon to another of your Pokemon, and this creates synergy with a couple of different cards actually. In this list you'll see it being paired with the new Munkidori, and also working alongside Charon's Care to move energies from one Blissey to another, Charon's Care, and then continue attacking. Its attack return does 180 damage, which is pretty solid. It can two-shot everything, but it also lets you draw cards until you have 6 cards in your hand, which is not a bad effect at all. This could have just been a vanilla 180 attack, but it gives you some built-in draw power, which is not to be overlooked. The new Munkidori that I mentioned has the ability which says you may use this ability once during your turn if this Pokemon has any dark energy attached to it. So this deck list will be playing 5 dark energy, and like I said, we can move those energies around. So if you need to attach a dark energy to Munkidori to get this ability activated, use the ability, then you can use Blissey EX's ability to move that to a Blissey. The ability, if you do have that dark energy attached, once a turn allows you to move up to 3 damage counters from one of your Pokemon to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So this is great because Blissey will most of the time be tanking a hit. You can move damage from Blissey to another Pokemon of your opponent's, and then Charon's Care up the Blissey and swing. So you're getting that extra damage output every turn with the Munkidori. And this deck list is also playing one of the Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon, which has the ability that prevents all damage from attacks done to this Pokemon by your opponent's Pokemon that have an ability. And it also has a decent enough attack, doing 140 damage, and this attack's damage isn't affected by weakness, resistance, or any other effects, so it can go through something like Mimikyu if you need to. The last new card in this list we should take a look at is the Survival Cast A-Spec, which is a tool card that says if the Pokemon this card is attached to has full HP and would be knocked out by damage from an opponent's attack, that Pokemon is not knocked out and its remaining HP becomes 10 instead, then discard this card. So kind of a focus sash-like ability. You can put this on your Blissey EX, and even something like a Cinccino hitting it for 350 damage will still not one-shot it. As long as there was no prior damage on the Blissey, the Survival Cast will save it from that. On to the next one. This is another Blissey EX deck, also including Munkidori, with Palkia VSTAR, and this one got first place at a City League. Now, Palkia VSTAR can only accelerate energy to water Pokemon, but of course Blissey EX can move energy from any Pokemon to any Pokemon, as long as it's a basic energy. So if you like whiff turn 1 attachment on the Blissey, or you want to swing for the full 180 and not use a double turbo energy, you can use Palkia VSTAR Star Portal to put energies onto itself or Radiant Greninja, and then use Blissey EX to move energy from one of those Pokemon onto Blissey if needed. This list is playing Hero's Cape instead of the Survival Cast. They both are pretty similar because if your opponent doesn't have a Lost Vacuum or a Jamming Tower, they're both going to help Blissey survive an extra turn. But the Hero's Cape can be reused over and over. Every time you Charon's Care, pick it up, put the Hero's Cape back on, whereas the Survival Cast can't. So that makes me think that the Hero's Cape is probably a little bit better unless there's something else I'm missing. I guess the Survival Cast prevents the knockout even if it's going over 400 damage, whereas the Hero's Cape would not stop the Blissey being knocked out if they can do more than 400 damage. We do have another new tool card in this deck list though, the Fan card. I forget what this is being translated as, but it reads, if the active Pokemon this card is attached to is damaged by an opponent's attack, move an energy from the attacking Pokemon to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. So this can be great against any deck like Charizard or Dragapult that is not one-shotting your Blisseys, and you force them to move their energies to Pokemon that they don't want their energies on. And this can be especially annoying for decks that play a low count of energy. You might just run them out of energies and make them whiff an attack here and there. Even if this makes the opponent whiff an attack one time, I'd say it's probably worth it. And of course, this deck list is still using the Charon's Care strategy for healing your Blisseys. I think that will be constant throughout any Blissey EX decks that we see, just because it has such good synergy with Blissey's high HP and colorless typing. And like I said, we were going to look at a few Blissey EX deck lists. Here's one more. This was a third place City League deck list, and this one is using 4 of the new Teal Mask Ogerpon EX with the ability Teal Dance. You may use this ability once a turn, attach a basic grass energy card from your hand to this Pokemon, then draw 1 card. And of course that works great with Blissey, because Blissey can move basic energy from a Pokemon to another Pokemon. Teal Mask also has the attack Myriad Leaf Shower, which does 30 damage plus 30 more damage for each energy attached to both active Pokemon. This deck is also playing a Tropius as a single prize attacker, which can do 130 and then move all energy from this Pokemon to one of your benched Pokemon. I think the biggest problem for Blissey is likely the Cinccino in Lugia decks that can easily one-shot the Blissey EX, and the best way to counteract that is probably just a single prizer, and Tropius can conserve energy while knocking out a Cinccino, so potentially that is what this is here for. Not really sure, but yeah, I do think that the hardest part about Blissey EX getting into the meta is going to be things that can one-shot it, like that Cinccino, and also things like effects of attacks, like Giratina VSTAR, Star Requiem, and Roaring Moon EX's Frenzied Gouging. Next, we have 2 Raging Bolt EX deck lists. If you saw my video covering the more popular meta decks, you'll see that I covered the Raging Bolt Ogerpon EX variant over there, so I won't be talking about that one today. This Raging Bolt EX deck uses Palkia VSTAR and Sandy Shocks EX as its ways to accelerate energy onto the board, as well as Professor Sada's Vitality to accelerate energy onto ancient Pokemon. This deck is using 2 new cards, one of them being that Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon that I mentioned. We'll see this popping up a lot as players try to gauge how useful this is into the metagame. There are plenty of great Pokemon with abilities and without abilities, so it's going to depend kind of what matchups are you trying to enhance, and does this really do that trick for you. The other new card in this deck is Unfair Stamp, which you can only play if one of your Pokemon were knocked out last turn, and both players shuffle their hand, you draw 5, your opponent draws 2. It's almost like a Roxanne on an item card, and it doesn't have prize card requirements, so this card is incredibly strong, and until you identify that your opponent is not playing Unfair Stamp, playing with the potential of Unfair Stamp in mind is going to be important against a lot of decks that can commonly play it. So this Raging Bolt Palkia deck got 2nd place at a City League, and now we have a 1st place Raging Bolt EX deck list. Similar idea, playing the Sandy Shocks, playing the Slitherwing, Professor Sada's, of course, accelerating energies, but not playing the Palkia VSTAR line that we saw in the last one, and they are also playing Prime Catcher as the A-Spec of choice here in this list, and this one did get 1st place at a City League. Next, we've got a Regidrago VSTAR deck. So let me refresh everyone. This card has 280 health. It's Dragon type VSTAR, no weakness, of course. The ability Legacy Star reads you may discard the top 7 cards of your deck, then put up to 2 cards from your discard pile into your hand. And then the Apex Dragon is going to be the main attack this deck uses. Apex Dragon reads, choose an attack from a dragon Pokemon in your discard pile and use it as this attack. Also, the Legacy Star is, of course, Regidrago's VSTAR power ability, so that is just once a game. But Apex Dragon attack, that's going to be the main attack of this deck. And we can copy in this list Dragapult EX, Hisuian Goodra VSTAR, Raging Bolt EX, and Noivern EX's attacks. So we have a lot to work with here in terms of attacks that you can potentially use. And this deck is running 3 of the new Grass Ogerpon, which can accelerate Grass Energy to itself, and then 4 Energy Switch and 4 Earthen Vessel. So we're using that Ogerpon as a pseudo draw engine, as well as a means to accelerate energy onto the board and use Energy Switch to get them onto the Regidrago VSTAR, which is going to be the main attacker. Another deck featuring Ogerpon EX. This is also featuring another new Grass EX Pokemon, which is Sinistcha EX. I cannot pronounce this Pokemon for the life of me, but it has 2 attacks. The first one, Infusion Retribution. For a colorless, choose one of your opponent's Pokemon and put 2 damage counters on that Pokemon for each basic grass energy in your discard pile. Then shuffle all of those energy cards back into your deck. So a very interesting attack at the very least. And then Matcha Splash, it does 120, heal 30 from each of your Pokemon, which can definitely be useful against a deck like Dragapult. So this deck is running 15 grass energy. So if you're attacking with your Ogerpon EXs in the early game, you should be able to get a good bit of grass energy into the discard pile and then use that Sinistcha EX in the late game based on the amount of grass energy that are in your discard pile. But we also have the single prize Sinistcha, which has 2 attacks: Curse Drop to put 4 damage on your opponent's Pokemon any way you like, and the actual stronger attack here is going to be Blubbering Tea, which for a single grass energy allows you to discard up to 3 grass energy from your Pokemon in play, and then this attack does 70 damage for each card discarded in this way. So you'll be accelerating energy onto your Ogerpon EX and then discarding it with the single prize Sinistcha, but you can also use Ogerpon EX as an attacker if needed. And then in the late game, you can use the EX's attack when you have enough grass energy into the discard pile, and you can spread 2 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon however you like, based on the amount of grass energy you have in the discard pile. It's just you can't chain that attack over and over effectively because you have to shuffle those energies back into your deck after you use this attack. Next, we're showing Ting-Lu EX a little love with this 3rd place City League list. Now, this is not using the new Ting-Lu. There's a new single prize Ting-Lu coming out in this set, but it is using the Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon, which we've already looked at a couple of times, but it's going to offer that ability that says that it can't be hit by Pokemon with an ability, and it also goes through effects, so it can knock out something like a Mimikyu if you need it to. We also have the new Carmine supporter in here, which is typically going to be seen as a good supporter for Lugia. It allows you to play it on the first turn even if you go first, and it discards your hand and draws 5 cards. So on turn 1, going first, it's the only supporter in your deck you can play, and every turn after that, it's just a slightly worse Professor's Research. So Ting-Lu EX, in case you have all forgotten, it's been a while since we've talked about this on the channel. Ting-Lu EX hasn't really ever seen too much success, but it is a very, very cool card. I really, really enjoy Ting-Lu EX. The ability Cursed Land, as long as this Pokemon is in the active spot, your opponent's Pokemon in play that have any damage counters on them have no abilities. And the Land Scoop attack does 150 and put 2 damage counters on your opponent's bench Pokemon. And then you have the Koraidon EX's Dino Cry, which is going to be your energy accelerant, especially on turn 1 since it ends your turn. So you don't really want to be using this too much as the game goes on. Next, we have a 6th place Lost Zone Palafin EX deck. Palafin and Palafin EX, we kind of have to look at these cards together. So we have an older Palafin that was already out. This one has the Jet Punch attack that does 30 and then 30 to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. It also has the Justice Kick attack that does 210 damage, which is a pretty good amount. But if the Pokemon didn't move from the bench to the active this turn, this attack does nothing. So it does have to switch in from the bench, which is not hard to do because this is a Lost Zone deck, so it's playing a considerable amount of switching, including Switch Cart, and then also Prime Catcher and the new Kieran supporter, which allows you to either switch or do more damage. So there's plenty of opportunities to switch here. Then we have this new Palafin with the ability 0 to Hero. When this Pokemon moves from the active spot to the bench, again, we got a lot of switching synergy in here. This is like the switch deck. If this Pokemon moves from the active to the bench, search your deck for a Palafin EX and swap it with this Pokemon, and then shuffle this card back into your deck. And that's where the Palafin EX comes into play, which looks like they're trying to use this as the main attacker of the deck. There's 3 of it in here. Palafin EX has the ability Hero Spirit, which is really just a clause that says that it can't be put into play without that Palafin's 0 to Hero ability we just looked at. And what's so good about this card? Well, it's a stage 1 with 340 health. That's even more than Blissey EX has. And then the Giga Impact attack does 250 damage for just a water energy. So you do have to go through the Palafin 0 to Hero ability to get this thing onto the board. You can't put this into play any way else other than that 0 to Hero ability, and some way to switch or retreat the Palafin onto the bench to activate that ability. And then outside of that, this is just a Lost Zone deck. We got Comfey, Cramorant, Sableye, Blood Moon Ursaluna, Delibird, Rainy Greninja, Manaphy, Raikou V, all cards that are commonplace in Lost Zone box decks. It's just this one is focusing on the new Palafin EX and making that card function. Another Lost Zone box deck with an unlikely attacker, or a less than popular attacker, I should say, is this first place deck list with Hisuian Goodra VSTAR. Now, Lost Zone Hisuian Goodra VSTAR has been a deck. It's gotten placements in our most previous format, the Temporal Forces format, but it's not a meta deck. It is a perfect example of a rogue deck. It gets performances here and there and it pops up here and there, but it's not a deck that you expect to see when you're going to a large tournament. The new cards for this one include Blood Moon Ursaluna and Unfair Stamp, as well as Jamming Tower, which turns off all tool effects. Next, we have a 4th place Pidgeot EX control, and I wanted to feature one of these because I did feature a Snorlax stall deck in the video featuring the more competitive and popular decks from the Japanese City League meta, so I wanted to show Pidgeot EX, but I do think that evolution-based control decks, which is mostly just Pidgeot, are going to suffer from Dragapult EX being a popular force in the meta, because Pidgey can be easily knocked out, or Pidgeot EX can be devolved. Even with Mist Energy to put on your Pidgeot EX, all Dragapult EX decks are running at least one Enhanced Hammer. Some are also running Temple of Sinnoh to get rid of that effect of Mist Energy from protecting you from either the damage counters or the Devo, or both. So I am less hopeful for this archetype going into the next format than I am for Snorlax Stall, but I just wanted to feature this deck list here for all of the control players out there that wanted to see it. The only 2 new cards we've got featured here are the Blood Moon Ursaluna EX and the Cornerstone Ogerpon. Moving on, we've got the Festival Plaza deck. So Festival Plaza is a stadium card that says Pokemon with any energy attached cannot be affected by special conditions. You might ask why a deck is built around this stadium card that pretty much does nothing, but it works specifically with this Dipplin card. Dipplin is a stage 1 that evolves from Applin and has the ability Festival Fever. If Festival Plaza is in play, this Pokemon can use its own attack twice in a row, and its attack is due to wave 20 damage for each of your benched Pokemon. So that attack does 100 damage maximum. With a max belt, it can do 150. With a Defiance band, it can do 130. But also remember, if you're hitting for weakness, it's going to be doing 200 and then 200. The support for Festival Plaza somehow doesn't stop there, because Thwackey has the ability that says if your active Pokemon has the Festival Fever ability, which is what Dipplin has, you may search your deck for a card and put it in your hand. So this Thwackey just turns into a Pidgeot EX, and if you have multiple Thwackeys, you can search for multiple cards as long as your active Pokemon has that aforementioned ability name. So I do think this deck falls somewhere between meme tier and lower tiers, maybe like tier 3 or so. I'm not too high on it myself. I know there are some Thwackey and Festival Plaza believers out there. Let me know if you are in the comments down below, but I don't think this is going to be a real deck that actually does anything, but definitely wanted to share this 3rd place City League list for y'all that might be interested in this deck. From here on out, all of the deck lists are going to be 1st place finishers in the City Leagues, starting with this Greninja EX Frostlass deck. So Greninja EX is a stage 2 fighting Pokemon. that has 2 attacks. The first, Ninja Blade, does 170, and you may search your deck for a card and put it into your hand. So that can be pretty good, but you get the card after your attack happens, so your turn is ending. That means you can't use the card, and it can just be Aried or Iono'd or Roxanne or Judged out of your hand. So Ninja Blade is pretty good. It does a whole lot of damage for just 1 energy. The card search is kind of hit or miss, depending on if you're against a deck that can play Ionos every turn or wants to play Ionos every turn. And its second attack duplicates Barrage. Discard 2 energy from this Pokemon, and this attack does 120 damage to 2 of your opponent's benched Pokemon. So that's really good. It's like a rapid flow from G-Mex Urshifu, also kind of like Moonlight Shuriken. And if you use double turbo to satisfy that attack cost, which is a lot of the times how you're going to be using that attack, it'll do 100 and 100 instead of 120, 120 because of the double turbo. And what's special about this Greninja EX deck is that it's using the Frostlass card with the ability Chilling Curtain. During Pokemon Checkup, that means between turns, put 1 damage counter on each Pokemon in play that has any abilities. So that is going to not damage itself because it says excluding any Frostlass, but that will damage your own Pokemon on the board, like Rotom V if you have that down. But this is going to be especially good against decks with a lot of abilities on the board, like Charizard decks. They've got Charizard EX, they have Charmeleon with Flare Veil, they have Pidgeot EX, Rotom V, Lumineon V, Bibarel, a lot of Pokemon with abilities. I think the downside for this deck is Dragapult EX itself doesn't have abilities, Dreepy doesn't have abilities, and while Dracloak does have abilities, they can take a couple of ping damages from the Frostlass and then evolve it up into the Dragapult EX, and then the Frostlass stuff stops. And they probably have Manaphy to protect them from the Greninja EX attacks. So I don't think this deck is as strong as Dragapult if we're going to compare them at all, just because they're both stage 2s, they're both trying to damage the bench, they both have pretty efficient attack costs. So I think they are pretty comparable. They also both don't have abilities, so they're not doing anything in terms of consistency, unless you, of course, do count Greninja EX's search on its attack. But like I said, a card that you're searching for when you attack is a lot different than a card you're searching for like during the turn. So Greninja EX seems a little too fair, in my opinion, to be a top tier deck, which is exactly why we're covering this Greninja EX Frostlass deck today. Next, we have some more decks that aren't exactly rogue, but they also aren't exactly the top of the meta. And we're going to look at a few Roaring Moon decks here. So this first one is all single prizer Roaring Moon Ancient Box. It is using the new A-Spec Secret Box. You must discard 3 cards from your hand to play this card, and then you can search for an item, a Pokemon tool, a supporter, and a stadium card. So this is great because it allows you to put a lot of cards into the discard pile at once. But the downside is you're not playing Ancient Drum, so that means that's 1 less Ancient card to put into your discard pile. Next, we have another Roaring Moon deck. This one is using 3 Roaring Moon EX and 4 Dark Patch. Also using those Flutter Mains, but focusing fully on these Dark attackers and adding double prize attackers into the mix here. Like I said, with the 4 Dark Patch to support Roaring Moon EX's higher energy costs, as well as the new Unfair Stamp A-Spec. And then we have one more Roaring Moon deck, 3 of the Baby and 3 of the EX, alongside a 1/1 line of Darkrai VSTAR using Prime Catcher. So Prime Catcher and Dark Patch and Enhanced Hammer are probably some of the main targets that you're getting back with Darkrai VSTAR's VSTAR ability Star Abyss. And then other than that, we've got the Professor Sadas, we've got Mew EX and Greninja EX and Squawkabilly for draw support, and doing Roaring Moon stuff. Next, we've got a really interesting one at first place. This is a Luxray EX focused deck, but it's also playing Miraidon EX, which can search out your Shinxes and some of your other attackers. We've got Iron Hands EX, we've got the new Iron Thorns EX, which essentially has Path to the Peak printed on it while it's in the active, and then also Raikou V. So let's look at this new Luxray EX. The Piercing Eyes attack does 120. Look at your opponent's hand and discard a card you find there. Any kind of card, so that's really strong. And then Bolt Strike does 250. Discard all energy from this Pokemon. 250 for 2 energy is really good, and it has 310 hit points, so there's a good chance it won't be knocked out next turn. And do note that Electric Generator can accelerate energy to any benched Lightning Pokemon. It doesn't have to be a basic, so if you're able to rescue board retreat Luxray EX to the bench after you use its second attack, you can Electric Generator to it, then switch your active and go back in with Luxray EX using its attack multiple turns in a row. We have another deck with Miraidon EX here that is definitely on the rogue side. This is a Rotom VSTAR focused deck. Rotom V, of course, is a great card. It's a staple in the current standard format for its instant charge ability that allows you to draw cards and end your turn. But Rotom VSTAR has the Scrap Pulse attack, which does 80 damage plus 40 more for each Pokemon tool you put from your discard pile into the Lost Zone. So that's going to be the main attack of the deck. They're running 19 Pokemon tools in this deck between the TMs, Rescue Board, and EXP Share. Also playing the toolbox that can help you fetch out Pokemon tools from the deck so you can get those into the discard pile and do as much damage as possible with Rotom VSTAR. A new card they're playing in here is this Morpeko. It has the ability Looking for a Snack. Look, once during your turn, you may look at the top card of your deck and you may discard that card. Also note, I'm reading these translations off of Limitless TCG, so if they're different from what my editor is putting up on the screen from PokemonProxies.com, please don't mind that. We don't have the official translations out here on Limitless just yet. It also has the Collect and Apply attack. Attach up to 2 basic energies from your discard pile to your Pokemon in any way you like, which is actually pretty good for a Pokemon that's here mostly for its ability. And to close out this video, we have actually 2 decks that are featuring the Armarouge with Fire Off. So this first one is going to be Dragapult EX Armarouge, using Armarouge as the chosen way to accelerate energy to Dragapult EX. So you've got Magma Basin that can accelerate energy to benched fire Pokemon, and we can use Armarouge to move those to Dragapult if needed, but we can also attach Luminous Energy for turn to Munkidori, use its ability to move damage from one of your Pokemon to an opponent's Pokemon, which can also combo with Magma Basin, and then move that Luminous Energy from Munkidori onto your Dragapult EX if needed. This deck is using Radiant Alakazam, but I also feel like maybe there's a world where you play Radiant Charizard or Radiant Heatran in this build just because of the Magma Basin and the Fire Energy and the Armarouge. But of course, Radiant Alakazam works really well with Dragapult EX. And the last deck we'll look at today is Arceus Armarouge, which is definitely not popular enough to have its own share in the meta to be like a meta deck. So I still consider it either a lower tiered deck or rogue, just because of its play rate being so low. This archetype potentially does get a couple of new cards, though. We've got the Munkidori in here as well. That Munkidori is just thrown around everywhere. Really good ability if you can get extra energy onto the board, so you don't have to use your manual attachment for that, or if you can move the energy that you attach to it after you use the ability, which this deck can do, of course, with Armarouge's ability. And other than Munkidori, the only new card we have here in this deck list is going to be that Kieran Supporter, which allows you to either switch or do 30 more damage to EX and V Pokemon this turn. That's all I have for you today for rogue decks from Japanese City League events in the Twilight Masquerade format. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content, and you can check out ways to support my channel in the description down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.